straight. We're being told that companies must choose between one, obeying the law, and two, making money. Quite frankly, it's nonsense. You see, CEOs do not run charities, okay? They run spreadsheets. And the spreadsheets keep. Welcome back to Justice Redesign. I'm your host, Steve Teskey, retired judge, and this is episode 5 in a series exploring diversity, equity, and inclusion, also known as DEI, and also the anti-DEI policies of the current administration. Now, this episode is titled, Inclusion is a System, Not a Preference. So let's jump right into it. So let me get this straight. We're being told that companies must choose between, one, obeying the law, and two, making money. And between being fair and being competitive. And also between not discriminating and at the same time not being woke. Now that's the story, all right? And quite frankly, it's nonsense. Because if inclusion were illegal, unprofitable, and irrational, corporations would have killed it years ago. You see, CEOs do not run charities, okay? They run spreadsheets. And the spreadsheets keep saying something very inconvenient. And that is this: inclusion works.
Should organizations continue to prioritize DEI despite recent backlash? Most workers say DEI has a positive impact in the workplace, and they would not or would only reluctantly work in a place that doesn't take DEI seriously. Our research shows 71% of workers believe DEI initiatives foster a stronger sense of belonging, which is key to building inclusive work cultures. 64% say DEI efforts improve overall well-being, highlighting how inclusive environments support mental and emotional health at work. 62% report that DEI boosts employee engagement, showing how inclusive policies can drive higher levels of commitment and motivation. DEI should remain a key focus for companies looking to align with employee expectations and business goals. I'm Diana Scott, and this has been your CEO Insight Minute.
Now let's take a look at what the law actually says. Now let's slow down, get serious for a minute. Now, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibits employment decisions made because of race. So, with that said, that means it prohibits preference, it prohibits exclusion, it prohibits adverse treatment, and it does not prohibit improvement, though. You see, it does not prohibit expanding recruitment pipelines, standardizing evaluation criteria, removing bias screening filters, tracking promotion data, and lastly, building mentorship structures. The law says you may not prefer someone because of race, but the law does not say you must preserve systems that quietly advantage some and disadvantage others. There's a difference between preference and redesign, okay? So, inclusion, when properly implemented, is redesign, and redesign is lawful. So let's take a look at the word merit, or past opportunity versus future contribution, is how I like to look at it. Here's where the debate gets interesting. We've been trained to think merit means resume lines, but resume lines often reflect accumulated opportunity, like networks, mentors, access. Inclusion doesn't lower standards, okay? You see, it asks a different question. Not just what has this person accumulated, but what can this person contribute? Innovation capacity is a legitimate competency, all right? Cultural fluency is a legitimate competency. Market insight is a legitimate competency. If you're a global company and your leadership team all grew up in the same zip code, went to the same schools, and think the same way, you don't have merit. You have echo. Traditional merit measures past opportunity. Inclusive merit measures future contribution. You see, folks, that's not ideology, right? That's strategy. Now, let's take a look at the math. Now, let's talk about something corporations actually care about, right? And that's money. The Boston Consulting Group found that companies with more diverse management teams generate 19% higher innovation revenue. All right? 19%. Think about that. The McKinsey folks found companies in the top quartile for executive diversity are significantly more likely to outperform their peers, okay, on profitability. Now, I'm going to talk about the McKinsey report coming up in future episodes because there has been some critique of the McKinsey report in that the McKinsey report itself acknowledges that there is a correlation. Now, keep in mind, correlation and causation are not the same thing, right? So that is an appropriate and proper and rightful critique, okay? But it doesn't give any cause to completely dismiss the correlation. And I'm going to talk about that more coming up. But I just wanted to make note of it right now. And so let's move on. High DEI companies are substantially more likely to capture new markets. All right. So how does this translate? Well, diverse leadership teams innovate more. Innovation drives revenue. Revenue drives survival. So let's kind of do a reality check here. So if DEI actually lowered standards, if it actually hurt performance, if it actually sabotaged profitability, corporations would have buried it because they're in the money, getting money, making profit. All right. They would have buried it quietly, efficiently, ruthlessly. CEOs don't hold candlelight vigils for failed strategies. They cut them. They cut departments. They cut programs. They cut anything that threatens margins. So when you see Fortune 500 companies maintaining inclusion strategies, even rebranding them, even softening the acronym, ask yourself this. Are these executives secretly social activists? Come on. Or have they run the numbers? Because here's what the math says. 19% higher innovation revenue, greater likelihood of outperforming competitors, stronger market capture. You see, folks, that's not moral theory. That's shareholder return. That's what the board of directors of any corporation, their primary objective is to increase, okay, the profits for the shareholders. Now, you could call it woke. The spreadsheet calls it revenue. And here's what fascinates me is that the same critics who say, let the market decide, suddenly get very uncomfortable when the market actually decides. If inclusion increases return on investment, then abandoning inclusion because it offends someone's political sensibilities isn't principled. It's economically irrational. And boards of directors, see, folks, they have a fiduciary duty, as I mentioned a moment ago, to the shareholders, to enrich them, to increase profits. They are legally obligated to pursue strategies that enhance long-term value. So if the evidence says inclusive systems increase innovation and profitability, then dismantling them for optics raises a different question. Are we protecting shareholders or are we performing politics? Because if it's more about performing politics, then those board of directors are breaching their fiduciary duties to the shareholders. Now, let's take a look at inclusion first and the equation of DEI. So there's another important distinction here. Diversity is what you get. Inclusion is what you do. Let's listen to an expert who knows how diversity, equity, and inclusion is supposed to work. Many businesses have been going about this all wrong. They treat diversity as the driver when it's not. Effective DEI strategies place the emphasis on inclusion through effective hiring tools and promotional practices. Okay, that's what will increase diversity by using objective practices. So, take a look and listen to what he has to say.
The problem that we have with diversity, equity, and inclusion leads to what I think of as the definition of DE&I. Inclusion is about what we do as an organization. Diversity is what we get. In other words, we have to stop trying to fix the symptoms and actually understand what the real problems are. I will also tell you in a minute why I think that equity is what we want. I'll come back to that in a moment. But let's talk about that idea. Inclusion is what you do. Imagine a team that's the perfect team. You cannot get any more performance out of it because each individual performs at their peak and is a team that perform really, really well together. And imagine that now something happens so that one of the people on the team is unable to perform at their peak. What will happen to the performance of the team as a whole? It will decline. Suppose that now a second person is unable to perform at their peak. Not only is the team going to lose more performance because of the loss of the second individual, but the rest of the team is going to get frustrated because they have to pick up the slack, because they'll be late on delivering a project and their manager will say, oh, we're no longer going to give you the best projects. That means that pretty soon the performance of the entire team will decline dramatically because of that problem. Now, I didn't say anything about what the people on the team look like or what they did or why they were not able to work, but it leads to a profoundly important conclusion. Anything that any organization does that causes someone to feel excluded because of their personal characteristics is shooting themselves in the foot. This is a very important point. This is why the third part, which is that equity is what you want. If you have an organization in which you have people that are treated differently, and you see it because you see that the retention rates are not the same, that the performance is not the same, you are witnessing inequity. You're witnessing in the difference in the outcomes that people experience within your organization. When you see that happen, it means that there are people that are performing below their peak. And just like that example that I gave you, it means that you're making less money because you have less productivity. It also means that those people do not feel that they belong in your organization and they're going to leave. If the retention rate of men in your organization is 90%, but the retention of women is only 80%, that means that you're losing 10% too many women. If your company has 1,000 women, which is not a very big company, and you're paying them an average of $100,000 a year, and we know that it costs about 1 year's salary to replace them, it means that you have lost 100 people, and it's going to cost you $100,000 each. That's $10 million a year that you're throwing out the window because you're not treating women inclusively. And the same is true of people of color, people with disabilities, LGBTQ.
All right, so when organizations chase numbers without fixing systems, backlash follows. When organizations fix systems, transparent promotion pathways, bias-resistant evaluation, broader candidate sourcing, diversity increases organically. Folks, that's not preference, that's process integrity. The law prohibits racial favoritism. It does not prohibit designing better systems. The difference is everything. Veteran corporate diversity executive Jenny Clark has observed that what many companies labeled DEI was often little more than optics, a signaling exercise rather than structural reform. True inclusion, she argues, requires disciplined systems, that is, structured interviews, standardized scoring, measurable promotion pathways. You see, when those systems are implemented, something predictable happens. Talent distribution reflects demographic reality, not because standards are lowered, but because bias is reduced. Inclusion, properly designed, does not distort merit. It protects it. So let's hear directly from Ms. Clark. She is knowledgeable, experienced, and quite frankly, very impressive.
To analyze what this moment reveals about corporate diversity efforts and what actually drives equitable outcomes in organizations. What does the research show about merit, bias, and representation? The responses were eye-opening and point to something we've been avoiding. The real problem was never that we needed DEI programs. The problem was and remains what our supposedly merit-based systems were never actually merit-based to begin with. AI pointed to extensive research showing that even when organizations claim to evaluate purely on merit, they consistently favor relationships. People hire and promote those that they know, they like, and feel comfortable with. Pedigree. Candidates from prestigious schools or companies get preferential treatment regardless of actual performance. Loyalty. Long tenure is rewarded even when performance is mediocre. Cultural fit. Undefined, subjective criteria that consistently favor people similar to existing leadership. My favorite, executive presence. Again, subjective essentialism that correlate to demographic characteristics, not competence. One comprehensive analysis found that when companies claim to make objective hiring decisions without structured processes, they actually make more biased decisions, not fewer. Unstructured interviews, vague evaluation criteria, and reliance on gut feeling consistently produce homogeneous workforces, more of the same, not because of intentional discrimination, but because of how human decision-making actually works. AI went on to highlight research in what actually produces both merit-based outcomes and diverse representation, which includes structured interviews with standardized questions tied to actual job requirements. What these approaches have in common is that they make evaluation generally objective rather than relying on subjective judgment, relationships, or pedigree. And here's a fascinating finding. When organizations implement only merit-based system with these structured safeguards, representation of women and minorities improves naturally, not because the standards are lower, but because barriers to recognize competence are removed.
Okay, another reality check. And let me say this clearly. Corporations are not keeping inclusive practices because they feel morally guilty. They're keeping them because they work. They may change the acronym, they may soften the language, they may rebrand the department, but they're not voluntarily telling shareholders, hey, I got some good news here. Next year, we're lowering innovation by 19% for political consistency. No, that meaning doesn't exist. So let's do the pivot. So when critics shout reverse discrimination, they're often attacking something that isn't really happening. They're confusing system redesign with racial preference. They're confusing fairness with favoritism. And they're ignoring the math. If inclusion is lawful, okay, and inclusion is profitable, then the next question becomes unavoidable. Why has the language of civil rights suddenly flipped? How did the protection of historically marginalized groups become framed as discrimination against historically dominant ones? That's not a legal accident, folks, okay? It's a narrative shift. And in the next episode, we're going to unpack exactly how that shift happened. We're going to examine the so-called reverse discrimination trap and whether it reflects legal reality or political storytelling. Because once you understand that inclusion is architecture, not preference, the trap becomes visible. All right? So, and once you see that, it's hard not to unsee it. All right, let me close here. Inclusion is not about preferring identity. It's about correcting design flaws. It's about recognizing that innovation requires perspective. And perspective doesn't grow in monoculture. You can call that ideology, or you could call it competence. The market already decided. All right. Okay. Thank you very much for being here. And until the next time, everyone take care and please be safe.